the second draft of our little still life, just to kind of get it to a point where I thought we could start pushing some value. So I just kind of want to tell you what I did here, because this is kind of how I like to draw, me personally, like Jen as an artist, not just like showing you how I like to, or teaching you how to draw. But I started with the 2H pencil, which is the lightest pencil. I started by drawing in all my shapes. Okay, this time I decided to put a frame. I just loosely framed it. You can even see my sketch lines, kept it super loose. And then I started I like to just kind of let my hand just be really loose, let my lines sort of overlap, sort of between cross hatching and scribbling. And I start with my 2H pencil and I go all the way around and start anywhere where there's going to be dark values. I start and put some 2H pencil there. Then I move on to my HB and kind of repeat that process. Then I move on to my 2B, repeat that process, essentially focusing in on my dark areas, which in this particular still life is a lot, right? There's a lot of dark here, especially our entire background. I'm going to get in with my 6B. That's my darkest pencil. They do go darker than that, which I think, 8B could be really nice too. Or they make a pencil, it's called an ebony pencil, which can be really nice too. They claim it's black, but it's still super duper dark gray, really, in my opinion, but that can be nice. So that's kind of my process. And then I'll just show you, this is the one I had started last class, okay, where we kind of started, and I just kind of talked about some different areas and things like that. And one thing I want you to know is, take a look at my first version to my second, even like taking time on the bowl, right? And just like looking at the proportion of that and realizing I kind of just did that quick. And I did note this last class. I was aware of it and just kept going with it. But when I started it my second time, I was just a little bit more aware of that shape. So sometimes beginning with something and then starting it over again, I know several of you have done this before and you've told me you've done this, can be such a helpful tool, because you learn so much here. Think of this as the practice, getting to know it, and then you get to start and kind of, you've already gotten to know some of it and you've learned from some of the things maybe you didn't like how you did it, and you can fix it the second time. So, you don't always have to do that. I could just as easily keep going with this. Absolutely. I just thought, it'd be nice to show you kind of from a point where I like to get before I start pushing it. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or kind of things you're wondering about before I kind of start talking about this? Because obviously we're all at different places. Go ahead, Lori.
Did you say that you started with an HB pencil for the background first and then added
good question. I started with a 2H, but HB is also great to start with. I just happen to have a 2H. It's a really light pencil. Again, the H stands for hard graphite. So you don't press too hard with this because it'll indent your paper, because your graphite's harder. So that's why it's so light. I just keep it really light and really sketchy. And again, beginning with this lighter value, to me, in my opinion, I will get more depth, more value achieved by using a range of pencils, if that makes sense. Okay. Any other questions? That was really good though. Oh, Susan, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, I have one. I have a Conti pencil that's a special carbon pencil, and it's 3B. And what is it?
Ooh,
what does it
yeah.
fit in the range of things?
So that's going to be a really dark, soft, that should feel pretty soft, right? Do you feel like it's reminiscent of maybe pastel
It's not
or charcoal?
It's not charcoal-y, but it's definitely soft.
Yeah, that's like that's really dark. That'd be awesome for the background, honestly. And I have mixed charcoal with my graphite before. If you want to go pure black and get those actual true blacks in there. I mean, graphite's never really going to truly get there, but that graphite powder is really nice too. But let's see, I've got an HB, a 2B, a 4B, and a 6B. So I have 5 pencils total. And I don't know that I'm going to use a blender at all on this, to be honest with you. I don't necessarily always use blenders. I like to see a little bit more expression in my drawing, which is why I choose to draw this way. If you don't like this kind of style, if that doesn't appeal to you, keep in mind you can render this a lot smoother than what you're seeing here. This is just layer number 1. But keep in mind you can always go back to kind of what we talked about last week, where you're going directionally, right? So you're just going back and forth, or to bring up, I'm going to mention Mark's drawing too, what he showed us, how he does a lot of scumbling, which is how he keeps it so soft. So if you like that really soft kind of effect, keep in mind moving your pencil, keep moving your wrist, really, I should say, in little kind of motions, little circular motions, and layering those and varying your pressure is going to create that softness. And when you repeat that over everything in your drawing, it appears unified, soft, very cohesive. Whereas I tend to like to, you know, I almost feel like I'm a hybrid between Mark and Susan would be a good way to describe me. You know, I like to have some things be really kind of smooth and rendered a little bit more realistically. And then I'll put kind of punches of like kind of expressive lines and things in there too. So I like to play with the juxtaposition there. That's just something I like to do. So again, just stressing, thinking about your style and kind of how you want to work. But the fun part now is we get to see this transform. It's very flat right now. And now as I start to push this value darker, we're going to see this stuff, these shapes will turn to form, right? We'll start to see depth. The other thing I'll mention too is getting your pencil, like my pencil is crazy sharp right now. And using like the little knives or little sandpaper and even carving up your pencil a little bit and keeping it super duper sharp and kind of scumbling, that's how a lot of artists get things super duper realistic as well. So at any point to stop if you have questions and, you know, kind of talk a little bit about what I'm doing, but you know, I think a fun part about this is getting a chance to kind of collaboratively be together, work together, and then kind of share. I just love sharing our work at the end too, and just learning from each other. I think that's really, really cool, and seeing everybody's style. So I'm using an HB, again, just to reiterate that, and I'm just going around and looking at where all these dark spots are, and I'm starting to push them. You know, this is that process that you could refer to as like rendering. We're starting to render these forms. And if you want things to be realistic, you know, think about how much detail you're choosing to include. Like I'm putting some of these little, there's these little kind of dots on the apple. You know, I am using my pencil just to kind of place those in. You know, and I might not get all of them because again, I'm a little bit more expressive. So you choose what works for you. You know, and I always think a good kind of rule of thumb is you want to see at least minimum a range of 5 values, but oftentimes there's even more. And you can even kind of count them and be like, okay, well, here's white, you know, here's the next one, then this one, then this one, then this one, and kind of count how many you see, and then make sure you're matching that on your own drawing. Some little tips that help me. And again, I just kind of do a little bit of kind of scumbling slash scribbling slash cross hatching. It's like this little hybrid. And I don't know, to me, when I shade this way, it feels good. It feels therapeutic. It feels relaxing, expressive, and freeing. A little bit more reminiscent to my painting. And I've learned to just kind of love the connection between my style of painting and my style of drawing, and I've learned to kind of embrace that a little bit. So, pay attention to like kind of what feels good when you're shading or moving your hand around a little bit, because I think that's some of the therapeutic benefits of art. That's the stress relief when you kind of let go and embrace some of that stuff a little bit. And the more you draw, the faster you're going to get to. So if you feel like you're not even to this point yet, depending on if you were able to work on it much outside of class or not, that's okay. We all draw at different paces. I'm also going to bring in just a second sheet of paper. I like to lay a sheet of paper where I'm not drawing because I'm right-handed. I've mentioned this before, but I'm the type, I will get pencil smudges all the way up to here, and I'm not so good at lifting and not resting. That's just, I don't know, something for me. So I find this is helpful. So if this is in your way and you're wanting to see something underneath the paper, just ask me to move it and I will. I'm still just using my HB. I'll be kind of here for a little bit probably as I go around. And again, I like to hop around. We've kind of talked about that too a little bit, how you could sort of hop around or sit and render one thing. And I think that's just, you figure that out as who you are as a person. I will say it is very enjoyable watching people render one object with the rest of it empty, and then they move on and move on. I don't know if you've ever seen videos like that. They're all over YouTube and whatnot, but I always think that is really cool to watch that process, even though I'm just not that way. But that may be a fun challenge for myself. But to me, I've probably said this before, I know I get repetitive sometimes, but I think repetition is good. That I like to hop around because it makes it feel more unified to me. Like it's a cohesive, it's working together. There's all these parts, but it's together. And especially if you're sitting down and working on it multiple days, for me, I just feel like some days, I might have this kind of movement and maybe the next day it's just feeling different based on my mood. And that's just me getting to know myself as an artist and how I like to work. So I know I talk about that a lot too, but I think that is just so, so important, that you get to know yourself as an artist and some of your work habits and what works and what doesn't. And sometimes I even, with this dark background, even might just kind of render around these shapes a little bit too, just to kind of start to see that value. Again, it's definitely fun, I think, how people's personality comes out in their artwork. Just bits and pieces about yourself, maybe even things you can't fully describe. But it's just apparent. You're like, I see that in my students all the time. I look at the work they make based on who they are, and I'm like, well, this makes sense. If you still feel too, if shapes are stressing you out, or that's a struggle, You know, there's always the grid, of course, which I know several of you have been utilizing. But there's also, I've mentioned this before too, but taking tracing paper and even just tracing the shapes and then trying to draw them after having traced them can just be helpful with that muscle memory. So again, just a tip if you haven't tried that yet and you still feel like, you're not loving the shape of something. And you don't even have to do it for everything. You can even sometimes do it for just a few things or one thing. Some oil pastel or pastel from our pastel class the other day is hanging out on my table here. See a little fleck of orange and I'm like, you're not from my pencil. And already, you know, it's like we can start to see depth and value and this form start to be developed even as we just start to darken. But you know, I picked this dark image, has a lot of darks on purpose too. So don't be afraid to really push that dark. And again, I think for me, layering pencils in this way helps me build that through layering, which eliminates the need for blending because the layering achieves all the blending I'm looking for. I think you have more control over your process too. You know, we've talked about this, but not everything has to be put down in one single layer. Multiple layers are our best friend when it comes to drawing and painting. You know, as you're starting to add more value and push things darker, and you're taking note of, you know, these different lines and textures that you're seeing, this is where that problem solving comes into play, that you get to ask yourself, okay, how do I want to interpret that texture visually, right? It's that visual texture, you know, and think about different ways you could move your pencil around. You can always try things on separate paper. And we have a class coming up too on, if you haven't looked on our calendar, but we do have a class coming up where we'll take a closer look at some different shading strategies too, of course, which we've talked about doing, but that's going to help too. But every time you draw, it's, you know, an opportunity, I think, to learn how to do something a little bit different, because you're always going to be drawing something different, most likely. You know, get boring drawing the same thing all the time. I mean, I do think, like I mentioned, starting it over, drawing it again is a very helpful tool. But I think every time you draw something different, you're going to learn something totally new that then you can maybe apply to the next drawing. You know, and I've mentioned this too, if looking at the whole image is too overwhelming for you, remember you can always use paper and block off parts of it and only look at one bit at a time. It's almost like gridding, but you know, blocking out, that can be helpful. You know, and thinking about highlights, when you come across highlights, couple strategies is I just kind of draw around where the highlight would be, like leaving an empty space, sort of shading around it, making sure my edges match the shading so it doesn't look outlined. But you can also erase too. So you could shade fully and then pull out with an eraser with that highlight. Or, you know, perhaps there's you're using both strategies, which I often do. And I'm just kind of building up and layering just these different pencil lines. Again, just going around the form of the apple to just kind of push what I'm seeing here, push that form, making it look round. Just a reminder that dark values go back in space, they recede, and light values come forward, they pop out at us. And that's why it's key to have both with a range in a drawing to create value, to create depth. And you know, depth is one of those things that's awesome in an artwork, regardless if it's realistic or not. But yeah, don't be afraid too to let your pencil just move in different directions on the paper. And I think one of the best things you can do is just allow yourself to experiment. I can't tell you how much of art for me really truly was just self-taught or sort of discovered. You know, even to be honest, some of my art when I was in art college, some of my professors, you know, they just kind of say, okay, this, you know, do this thing, you know, this painting or this drawing, and, you know, they might give us a little kind of direction or instruction, but so much of it is on your own. And I think that's just because art is so individual that techniques can be shown and skills demonstrated, and we can observe and watch, and it's a great way to learn, but until we start doing, because like I've mentioned, there's that element of you involved in it, that's your style and the way you naturally do things, because just like your penmanship, you know, I find people's handwriting to me is so intriguing. I just, you know, it's so interesting how it seems to be reflective of their personalities in a sense. And being a teacher, you know, it's like they don't teach cursive like they do or they used to. And so it's always interesting to me when I see kids who write in cursive because they taught themselves how, or a parent taught them how. Or sometimes they just have this like super duper neat handwriting. And, you know, it's not exclusive to gender either. It's, you know, male and female I'm seeing with really, really good handwriting. It's just like interesting to see that connection to how they draw too. So take a look at your handwriting sometime and see if it matches how you draw at all. It might be interesting. You know, I always think it's interesting too how we can interpret things. Like this time I did add these fruits in the background that are kind of blurry. They're hazy, they're blurred out because of this photograph is, you know, more in focus with this the apples. So thinking about how could I kind of use more crisp lines in these apples versus maybe creating some kind of softness back here while still, you know, showing this stark value. So those are just, you know, different types of things I consider or ask myself as I'm drawing. What do I want to do here? You know, and it's like, it's not a right or wrong thing. It's a, okay, let's ask myself and think about this and figure out what would look good.
That's one of the things that I thought about too, is looking at like photographs where some portions of it are out of focus. You know, how do you render that? How do you
Mm-hmm.
draw that? You know, as far as in focus, that's pretty simple. Everything's very crisp and clean, and you know.
Yes.
But to get that out of focus effect, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with that a little bit myself. Trying to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's challenging for sure. I think that was spot on what you said. The crisp lines are naturally easier because our pencils just naturally sort of do that. But yeah, how do you get those softer kind of objects, and if you haven't tried the powder charcoal, that can be really nice because you can blend it out a little bit. Or sorry, not powder graphite is what I meant to say. They also make charcoal, but that can be really kind of fun to play with. Some of the blending stumps and tortillons and things like that can be good to kind of experiment with. But yeah, it's definitely challenging. It's kind of like rendering glass and things like that. You've got to think about the surface quality or how the edges interact.
But I've been one I try to figure out how to do things with the least, the simplest possible, like with just a pencil. With
Yes.
the powders and stuff like that, yeah, you can achieve different effects like that. It
Yes.
reminds me of I was looking through a website on colored pencils, because I'm really getting into colored pencils now.
Woohoo! Yay!
I saw this guy that was doing landscapes and everything else using only 3 colors. That's it.
Wow.
3 colors, and
Cool.
it was absolutely amazing what he could accomplish. But he
That's
used only
incredible.
3 pencils.
I love that. You should share that. That would be really cool to check out. Yeah, that intrigues me a lot. I think setting limitations for yourself. I've mentioned this guy before, but a really, really good one to check out. I'm even I'll put this in the chat even. It's a TED Talk called Embrace the Shake with artist Phil Hansen. So I put it in the chat if you want to check this out. You can just watch it on YouTube. But I love it because he really talks about the power of giving yourself limitations as an artist and how it can enhance your skills and your creativity. So kind of like Mark just mentioned, this artist could use all the colors that he wants, right? They're there, but he's choosing not to. He's choosing to use 3 because he's developing and honing that kind of skill set. So I think that's really, really cool to set yourself up with some limitations. So yeah, like Mark is saying, the graphite powders and things like that, some extra tools can be fun. They provide kind of a different experience, but you don't need them. Absolutely don't need them. Things can be done with just a pencil, just paper and pencil. Absolutely. That's why I love drawing too. I just, it's a very accessible thing to most people once they get over the intimidation of it, of course, because it can be a little scary for some in the beginning. If you haven't checked it out, I put this really cool article on our blog homepage about how drawing is actually one of the best ways to learn. But, it's just sort of become this thing people are sort of intimidated by or think they can't do if they haven't learned how to, draw something very realistically. But drawing is just a very good way for us to learn anything. And I'm still using my HB pencil. I haven't left that one yet. I will let you know when I do. But I could be here for a little while. I mentioned this before too, but I always think it's interesting to track how many hours or how much time you put into drawing something. sometimes I'll even just jot down on the corner of my sketch, like this was 6 hours, or, I put this much time into it. I think it's interesting too, as you start to develop your skills, whether it's you're improving speed or, it's just interesting, I think, to think about how much time goes into something. Two, if you're ever interested in selling your work one day, that's always a factor, right? Is how much time was spent. Plus, not everything has a super dark background, so that just takes some time to render. And for me, I like to kind of go there because it's helping pop my forms a little bit when I'm seeing the background be pushed. Oh, and for those of you who don't know, from the class the other day, I actually got put on quarantine from school. So I had a student that tested positive in one of my classes. So they put that whole class on quarantine, me, and all that students' other teachers. So there's like 300 teachers in my building, and I'm one of 7 that I have to be out for this whole next week.
Sorry to hear that, Jen. I hope you're okay.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. I'm sure I'll be okay. I'll be able to get tested, I think, in a couple days will be like the soonest I can be tested. So and they provide us with all of that. So I'll get tested, but it's just kind of like I didn't expect it to happen so soon. I didn't expect me to be one of the first.
Katie just finished her first week at high school.
She did. How did she like it?
She liked it a lot. She likes it a lot. We just have to get used to getting up early.
Yes, that's a challenge. I understand.
Yeah. But we're getting there. Yeah, so far so good, and we're hoping that everybody stays safe.
Yes, absolutely. So is she there 5 days a week, full time?
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I hope they all stay safe down there too. Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of the children have opted to do online learning, virtual learning, but
Yep.
I figured that she wants to. She's very sociable, so we'll have her see how she does.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, the one thing I learned about being back was how good it felt to be around students again.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, I missed them a lot. So, our summer break is nice so we can recharge, but 5 months is way too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's time.
Yeah, well, I'll be thinking about her and hoping that she's having a good time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll tell her you said that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I got a nice kind of HB layer on the background finally. Got a few more kind of areas to sort of fill in here. And then I'm going to start with my 2B. Another helpful tip as we start to push values. When things corners or edges start to get next to each other, and we're like, okay, well, which one's darker? Or is this blending together and it shouldn't? Go back to your reference photo and specifically look. What side is darker? Is usually there will be a darker side. For example, if I look over here, I know right now I've got this pretty similar value. I need to push this right side much darker than over here. So, you know, check those values and look where, you know, where they're placed and what's darker, what's lighter, and kind of check yourself. That's just something I think is helpful as you start to push things darker, because when you're, especially if you're newer to drawing or newer to drawing this way, it can get a little confusing in the beginning. And again, these are just things I found from learners of all ages that have kind of led me to some of these tips. So obviously, I know some tips are like, yeah, that works for me. Some they don't. It's always like take it or leave it kind of a thing too. So I have my 2B now, and I'm going to actually start with this edge of this apple and just kind of start pushing that darker. And I will mention, just because I got my 2B now doesn't mean I can't go back to my HB should I need it again for some reason. I generally try to kind of move into that direction of you know, only needing the darker pencils, but it's not to say you can't go back if you need to. Need to fix this a little bit. This edge, there we go. And it's okay to, if you need to change something, erase something, is, you know, as you're going around, again, maybe this is another reason I like doing it this way, is I feel like you're visiting the forms over and over and over and over again and seeing them over and over again versus spending, okay, some time with this apple, some time with this apple, some time with this pear. It's like you get to revisit them. And as you get to revisit them, you start to notice things you didn't see before. And I know some of you are starting to understand that, because we've talked about that when we set artwork down for a while and come back to it. We see it differently. So again, hopping around for me, it's like an opportunity to come back to it again. My little cheesy analogy of like, you know, dating it, or it's your friend and you're coming back, and the more time you spend with it, right, and the more occasions, you get to know it better. So I don't know, again, art is just this observation game that you're looking, you're seeing, and you're interpreting. And two, you know, step back from it, hold it back at a distance. Especially when you draw, you are hovered over it, so close looking at it. So sometimes we don't get a true look at it until we step away from it. Look at it with a different perspective. You know, this is the kind of drawing for me is easy to get sucked in for just a few hours. When I was in college, we would, you know, have our drawing classes. They would be 3-hour classes, and you know, you take a little break in the middle maybe, but my instructor would just turn on some music and we would sit around this huge still life. In the center of the room was this just massive still life with all kinds of stuff, and you just picked a spot in the room and spent a few minutes drawing a few sketches for maybe planning your composition, and you just kind of got to it. And just imagine uninterrupted, you know, getting to work for 3 hours at a time, and then having someone come over to you and give you personalized feedback and tips to improve. It was quite glorious. I really loved my drawing classes. Even though like I like painting more than drawing, I would say I liked my drawing classes more than my painting classes just because of that environment and that sort of invitation to just kind of relax. And for me, it was where drawing truly became a relaxing thing and a fun thing was drawing these still lives. And I remember thinking in high school that they were so boring. But then in college, I don't know, you just get older, I guess, and you see things with different eyes. And I was like, oh, still life could be anything. Like anything could be a still life. It doesn't move, it's still, it can work. And when I kind of had that mindset, I think I just started to really, really enjoy it, because then I could pick my objects, I could pick my composition, you can make it funky and fun. And I had a really great instructor who definitely encouraged us to explore our styles too. You know, and think about, I haven't really touched much of the bowl yet, but, you know, I'm thinking about, this is a ceramic bowl. And I just kind of imagine kind of those lines that are curving around. You can almost kind of see them in the glaze or the paint. So almost when I'm sketching, I just kind of want to try to mimic that as much as I can. That's kind of where my mind goes, is how could I mimic that shape, that line, that curve, that texture. Push that darker. Actually, I might take a minute to just kind of pull out this little design a little bit. To something like a design on something. Those are kind of an opportunity for, I think, a couple things. Is one, trying to render it exactly as you see it, which is a challenge, of course. Two, interpreting it kind of in your own kind of way, maybe kind of loosely based on what you see. Or, you know, there's always the option to just not put something in there. And I just want to stress that if there's something that you don't like, or you're like, I just don't want to draw that, you are the artist and you can choose not to include something in your drawing if that's what you want to do. I think, you know, the bowl's kind of simple. This little pattern is relatively simple enough to just kind of fill in these little shapes. I think it adds a little something. I think it's kind of nice. But again, that's one of those things, you can take it or leave it. I need to fix my bowl shape a little bit too. You know, and then think about a couple of terms, or one term I just want to mention to everyone that I think is good to know in the art world is the term implied line. And this is what I mean by an implied line. If you look really closely at this pear right here, notice how the edge of the pear is sort of vanishing into the shadow. Okay, we can maybe sort of make it out a little bit, or maybe even back here where we see some of these blurred, hazy edges. That would be an implied line. We know there's a line there. Our mind connects this line, even though we might not see a direct line like we do over here, or here, or here. So just know anytime there's a sort of a fade or a blur, or things get hazy, but it's still in your mind makes sense that there would be a line here. And, you know, this is in the world of implied lines, maybe not the best example, but in this particular image, it's probably the biggest area of implied line. So I just wanted to point that out as a term because we've talked about contour lines as outlines. So knowing about implied lines as suggested lines is just a good term to know. And it's evident in paintings, drawings, sculptures, photography. Foot two, I kind of. When you're shading too is a good time to kind of take note of shape of things. If you need to refine anything before you make it too dark, it's a good time to refine. Like I'm just pulling out a little bit so I can just redraw this foot at the bottom of the bowl here. There we go, that looks better. I mean, truthfully, I bet I could have this done in like another hour if I sat uninterrupted and just worked on it with this kind of way I'm drawing. Maybe a little bit longer, just kind of depends. Whereas if I sit and render things a little bit more realistically, that just takes longer because you're more precise. If you're scumbling just takes longer, I think, at least. But one of my professors used to say like a good kind of rule of thumb is spend at least like 3 hours on a still life drawing. Just because it's going to give you time to layer, to push those values. I think there's a time and a place, of course, to do quick little sketches and things. I do that all the time, quick sketches that maybe take a half hour or an hour, things like that. And those sketches often are unfinished, right? Or things that sort of informed more finished pieces. So please know, I'm referring to if you're trying to render this completely, to call it a finished drawing. And how do you know when it's finished? That's always one of those questions. How do you know when something's done? For me, I mean, I just kind of know, I feel like with my process, just because at this point I've been doing it for quite a while, I feel like it just sort of talks to me in a sense and almost lets me know, okay, time to be done. But in the beginning, I found it helpful to ask people, what do you think about this? Would you add something? And I found sometimes I would get good suggestions, sometimes something to think about, but no thank you, it doesn't fit. And, that's how suggestions always are, but that always helped me in the beginning, just when I wasn't sure if something was finished or not. Another kind of good method is taking a couple days off from it and then look at it again, see how you feel about it. And again, I'm a broken record with this one, but step back from it. It's so important. Just remember, you're so up close to it when you're working on it. You're just, in its face, basically. So stepping back is so, so helpful. We'll prop it up on a windowsill or something and step back, or if you've got a little ledge or something, or if you've got someone else around you, maybe they could hold it for you, or on a bookshelf or anything that you can just kind of stand back and look at it for a few minutes. think I've mentioned this before too, but snapping photos of your drawings in progress can be really helpful to just flip back through them and just look at the building up of the value. So this next week, if anyone wants to, you know, meet up during the day or chat about your art specifically, I'll be home because I'll be on quarantine. So when my kids at school are all taken care of, I've got lessons for them all finished. They have a sub in the classroom, so I'm just here hanging out. So if you know, if I had known in advance, I would have scheduled some extra classes for us probably, but you know, it would be a good time if anyone wants to chat. You know, we could even do like a little 10-minute, little 15-minute thing. So if that interests you, just shoot me an email. I'll be around every day. So. And I don't only want to clean my house.
What about your daughter? If you're on quarantine, does your daughter have to stay home as well?
That's a great question. No, because she's what they call tertiary, because I'm secondary, which I tried to wrap my head around it, which kind of makes sense, but kind of doesn't make sense at the same time. Yeah. But I've been distancing, like I'm not like away from her completely, but like I've been purposely kind of keeping a little bit of distance from her, just until I get tested to make sure. But they have not had any positive cases at her school, and they're aware that I'm home, and they're like, yeah, she can keep coming. So yeah, she's still going. But in the case that she needed to stay home, it's like she could, of course. Yeah, I think about that. What if a teacher is working and they have a young child that needs to be in quarantine? The district told us it would be our responsibility to find childcare. But my thought is, who's going to, you know, potentially want to take care of a child that could expose them?
Right.
So I think there's a lot of unknowns. My principal seems to think we're going to go remote. So we'll see. Maybe I'll never go back. Maybe I'm out for the rest of the year. I don't know. I'll keep you all posted. Well, let's see, we got about 4 minutes. So I'd love to check in with everyone. I mean, I feel like at this point, you can at least kind of see my process, right? I only made it to my 2B. I got my 4B and my 6B to kind of start pushing this even darker. But you can kind of see this whole process of how I kind of hopped around, and I'm working the whole thing at once, which again is my process. It helps me unify things and feel good. But for some of you, excuse me, if you'd rather work one object at a time, please know that's an acceptable thing to do too. I just like to stress that there's not one way to do things, you know. It's not math. So let me change my camera around. Oops, I didn't mean to turn it off completely. There we go. Okay. Let's see. Does anyone want to share? Carol, you want to go?
Can you see?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm going to spotlight yours. Nice. Looking good. Here's 3 things I really love about yours, Carol. 1, I think your shapes are coming out really nicely. I can tell that you're improving there. It's looking really good. And then 2, again, I told you this before, but I love that you're not afraid to push things dark, because when you have those darks, you're going to have just a beautiful, full range of value. And then the other thing that I really like that I saw that you did was some of your kind of blending. It looks like you did some blending too, which is really nice.
I used a Kleenex and went over the background after
Did you
I
like?
scribbled it all.
Yeah. Did you like that?
I like that because I think it looks kind of together. Oh, wait, now I
Yeah.
don't even. Can you tell?
Yeah, I think so too. It does. It brings it together and it makes the transition soft,
Mm-hmm.
which is more natural, right?
Mhm.
Typically, I mean, not always, sometimes light does cast weird shapes on things. Of course, that's a special instance. But typically, shadow and light is pretty soft, right? So we see that kind of transition. So I think you did really good. You're doing awesome. It's really great seeing your growth. Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See, Lee, how did you do? Let's see, I'm gonna spotlight you. Ooh,
That's
I love
really
it.
pretty. I do too. That's
Your
neat.
suggestions, when I emailed you, your suggestions definitely helped. To
Good.
bring out the darks and
Good.
definitely helped.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. And I think you're so close, Lee. I love the expression. I love the cross hatching. I think that's really, really nice. You've got nice unity. And I just think pushing some of your darks darker is just going to bring those forms to life, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's really nice. Great job.
Thank you.
Let's see, Lori, how'd you do? Oops,
Okay.
there we go.
Ooh,
Ooh,
That looks pretty.
Lori,
that is pretty.
look at you.
I'm trying.
You're doing. You're
Thank
not
you.
just trying. You are doing. Like, really, your growth, whew, Lori.
Thank you.
Amazing. You got a lot to be proud of. That's great.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't, to me, it doesn't look like the shading's even, like the background's even. There's like patches that are darker than others.
Yep. So a couple things that are going to help you. One, just being aware of your pressure and how sharp your pencil is. Because if you're using the same amount of pressure, but your pencil's sharp, but then it goes to dull, it's going to change how it looks. So one thing is keeping your pencil sharp is going to help, and paying attention to your pressure of how heavy you're going. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you hold up your image one more time, see your outlines around your shapes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you take your value in the back and match it to those lines, it will look amazing, and that will pop it and make it look the forms are just going to transform when you do that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think I'll keep working on that.
Yeah,
Adding layers.
absolutely. It's layering for sure. You got it. That looks amazing. Nice job.
Thank you. Thanks, Teach.
Oh yeah.
It's very Cezanne.
That's what I thought too. I thought it looked like Cezanne.
What?
Here, I'm gonna type it in the chat. Look up Cezanne, Lori. Yours still looks a lot like his painting.
Wow. So the other painting that I thought was third grader, you said looked like Matisse. Now I got
Matisse. You're onto something. You're just a little art history lady.
Whoa.
You didn't even know it.
Oh.
It is. Susan,
Well,
how'd you do?
thank you.
You're welcome. So we go all through all the ladies first, and then we'll save Mark for last. Susan, do you want to share yours?
Oh, yeah. This was my paper bag, and as I got to the end, I had problems with it. This is like 3 layers of paper, and it's bumpy.
Oh, man.
Oh,
Yeah.
so beautiful.
That's see the color
Yeah.
better, and it's got so much graphite on it. It's shiny.
Yes, it will. It was like burnished. It'll get to
Yeah.
that point. When
And
it's
I
shiny,
use
yeah.
the blending stumps more on this one than I have on the others, but
Okay. Yeah, it's
That's it.
beautiful.
I think I pushed it enough.
Yeah, definitely spray if you have some fixatives. Spray some fixative on that one, for sure. That's
think that's
beautiful.
so-
I love the gray with the
Yeah.
graphite. I love the pops of white for your value. I think the expression is really cool. But it's fun to see that you've kind of continued the rendering on it, you know, and kind of pushed it. And I think that's really neat.
Well, and the ones in the background, I really left kind of gray. I mean, I left them
Yes.
out of focus and softened them even more, and that helped.
I think so too. And that's like the problem solving that comes in, right? Is you kind of decided, oh, this is what I'm going to do to achieve this effect. And I think you did a great job with it. Looks awesome. Cool. All right, Mark, let's see what you got.
Ooh,
Love it.
nice.
Mm,
Gorgeous.
really nice.
Looks like
Looks
you can
beautiful.
put it in a bowl and take a bite out of it.
Yeah, I could pick one up. There it goes.
Oh man, that's
That's
beautiful.
gorgeous.
Yeah,
That's just lovely.
yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful. Scumbling. Can we call you the Scumbling King?
Actually, what I like to do is kind of a combination of scumbling and cross hatching. Although with cross hatching, you know, your lines go over the top of each other. So basically, I just do a bunch of different directions and everything like that never really goes over the top of each other.
Yeah.
But it's not really circles. It's mostly just lines. It's mostly just little things.
Would
like
you say you keep your pencil pretty sharp?
that. For the detail work, yes. But when I'm doing like this, the whole background thing right here, you know, all this right here,
Mhm.
you know, the pencil could get pretty dull there because, you know, you want to cover a larger area, you know, as far as that goes.
Yes.
But for the
And it's
detail, like
softer.
for like the, you know, the fruit and stuff like that, it's a very sharp pencil. And then there's no scumbling here. This is just lines going in the direction of the, you know, trying to follow the contour
Yes.
of the thing. You know,
Yes,
so-
which is going to help pull that form out. Absolutely.
Right. Exactly.
Anything you can do to help it, right? To think about those lines and help push that is going to be great. Beautiful. Everyone did such a good job. Wow, seriously, everyone did amazing. You all did so great. It's awesome to see everybody's style